So I want us to now move into thinking about why should we be having conversations and teaching young people about sexual health. I've alluded to the fact that sexuality is a part of our life from the moment that we're born till the moment that we die. So it makes sense that we educate them around something that's going to be so paramount throughout their life, okay? As per with the swimming pool analogy, if we didn't teach our children or our young people how to swim, they would probably drown, okay? Same with talking about sexuality and relationships and things. We want to talk about this with them so that it can increase their personal safety, okay? You find yourself in a situation, how do you make yourself safe? How do you negotiate and have conversations with your partner around keeping safe, i.e. using contraception and protection, okay? So having these talks, again, it really comes back to building that trust and rapport with the young person. It's all leading to their personal safety being increased. It helps to increase their confidence and self-esteem. It's like any of us moving into a new situation or a new environment. The more we know about that situation or the environment, the more information and skill we have around it, the more confidently we go into that situation, yeah? As opposed to walking into a room and going, I know nothing, I don't know what I'm doing here. Your self-esteem is going to be deflated, okay? So providing them with the skills and information is going to help increase that self-esteem and self-confidence. It helps with decision making, and not just decision making when it comes to sexual health. It will help the decision making process through broader aspects of their life, okay? Predominantly around drug and alcohol use and mental health, as we spoke about before. The more confident these young people are, the more they value themselves and their self-esteem, the more likely it is that they're going to say no to potentially dangerous or risky situations. Or they still enter those situations, but with an element of calculated risk. I've thought about this and I think I know how to protect myself in the best way possible. Yeah? And it leads to better health or improved health outcomes across the board. Okay, so having these conversations is really important. I want us now to think for a moment though about the perception that we have as parents, carers or workers and what's happening for young people in terms of sex and sexual health versus the reality and what young people are actually telling us. So I want you to think about Year 10 students. Now Year 10 students are of legal age of consent, which we'll talk about in a moment, but most Year 10 students are 15 to 16, okay? Shout out a percentage of the number of young people you think in Year 10 that are engaged in sexual behaviours. 25%. 25%, yeah. Any other guesses? Anyone think it's higher? 16%? Higher at 16? Yep. So what sort of percentage? 40 to 50? Yeah. Anyone want to go higher than that?
About 60%.
60%? Yeah. Peter's a youth worker, so he's pretty close to on the ground and knowing these young people. All right, I want you to jump forward to Year 12. Year 12, everyone in Year 12 is of legal age of consent. They're all 16 and over in New South Wales. Most of these young people are around 17 to 18 years of age. What percentage of Year 12 students do we think are engaging in sex or sexual behaviours?
85.
85? Yeah. So pretty high numbers. Yeah, okay. So every few years there is a study done, the secondary schools survey, that asks young people about their sex and sexual behaviours and asks lots of questions around relationships, who they're having sex with, how much sex they're having, if they're having protected sex, where they're getting their information. You get the gist of the kinds of questions that they're asking. But they do ask questions around, are you sexually active? And I think they even ask how many sexual partners they've had. This was from back in 2013, so I acknowledge that it was 6 years ago and that things have changed since then, but not as much as we think. So back in 2013, only 25%, you've got it on the head, you've read the research, haven't you? 25% of Year 10 students were engaged in sex or sexual behaviours. That number only jumped to 50% in Year 12. So that means there's 50% of students in Year 12 who are legally allowed to engage in those behaviours who are not. That's the reality. But the perception, you're not wrong in your perception as workers, thinking that that number is much higher. Young people have the same perception. If you ask a young person how many people you think in Year 12 are having sex, they'll tell you 100%. They'll tell you everyone's having sex. Why is the reality different to the perception? Media?
Kids big knowing.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're talking about self-esteem here, yeah? So if I'm in a group of peers and they're talking about sex and sexual behaviour and they're telling me that they're having sex, and I'm sitting in that group knowing full well that I haven't had sex, but I want to be seen to fit in, damn right I'm telling them that I've had sex. I don't want to be experiencing something different to them. That's my self-esteem, that's my coolness, that's my sense of belonging. So there's a lot of young people big noting themselves or talking about behaviours and acts that they may not necessarily be doing. So again, that's why it's really important to check in with young people when they start to talk. Be like, tell me what you already know about that. Or tell me about that experience. So you're starting to get a feel of what's happening, because the reality versus perception is very different. The reality versus perception as well, I touched on it earlier about parents and carers, that some of them are very willing to take these conversations on with young people. Other parents and carers are very much like, that's not my bread and butter. That's why I send my kids to school. It's the same reason I sent my kids to preschool, because I don't do glitter in my house. I will do sexual health though, kind of comes with the territory of being a sexual health worker, I think. But there's a different reality versus perception in terms of education and what's happening as well. So if parents are only relying on school for their young people to get that education, there's a really good chance, like my friend Scott here, that they're going to miss out on that education altogether. Because not all schools are doing it, and not all schools are doing it well, okay? Most young people in a mainstream school in New South Wales at the moment will get that education through PE, but it's at the discretion of the PE teachers quite often, okay? The teachings and the education is also seen to be somewhat outdated in terms of what students are being taught. So if I'm sitting in a mainstream classroom as a same-sex identifying young person, there's a good chance that the education being presented to me is not going to be relevant to the relationships or situations that I have. A lot of it is very heteronormative, that is male and female, okay? So a lot of same-sex young people feel like they're missing out on relevant information, and they report that back in those studies, just saying that information, it's not relevant to me. Young people identify that they do want to get that information from parents and carers. Okay, a lot of parents and carers are like, they're not going to want to talk to me about that kind of stuff. But the young people are actually telling us that yes, they do want to get that information from parents and carers. You've given them information about everything else in their life, you've got that trust and rapport with them, why wouldn't they want to come to you to get that information? But we have identified other areas where they are going for that information if it's not coming from parents or carers. So quite often it is coming from social media or the internet, which has its pros and cons. Okay, because we all as adults know that you can't trust everything on the internet. Young people unfortunately don't have that same filter just yet. They're reaching out. So it's a really good medium and it's a really good tool for us to be able to use with young people. It's just important that we know the reputable sources of that information and refer them to those, which will come up in resources at the very end after Nolene has spoken.
So the Kardashians aren't going to do it?
No, probably not. Nor is Married at First Sight for those tuning in New South Wales right now. So young people want this information from their parents. That's who they trust.